So as our students celebrate Dr. Seuss's birthday this month and read his books, we have been exploring different ways of inclusiveness and looking at the lessons that Dr. Seuss has in his books. And as our last one, and very timely, which we did not plan for, becomes the topic that is very difficult to talk about, that topic of inclusive thought. What about if the person doesn't think the same way I do? How do we deal with those who butter their bread on the downside? Who think differently, who believe differently? How do we make a place for diverse thought in the church? I feel like we know the answer to these questions, but it's really difficult to say and to practice. And I am preaching to myself on this as well, especially this week. I hate conflict. I'm a peacekeeper, and I hate conflict. And so I avoid it best I can. I know many people struggle with this, and sometimes we're so afraid to get into an argument that we're willing to not engage at all. And this isn't the best response, because I know that I miss out on a lot of knowledge and a lot of Holy Spirit by avoiding tough conversations. Our contempt can replace conversation. When we encounter a different perspective, it can be much easier to reject or just repel that perspective than to be open to a different point of view and to learn from that. Sometimes we don't agree with someone, or we can't stand someone because of how they make us feel about ourselves. It's a reflection on us, not them. We're really good at assuming. You know what assuming does. If people assume that they understand someone's situation, it hurts that person. We hurt conversation and we talk about people instead of to people. As a church, we did a lot of that this last weekend, talking about people and not to people. We've been doing this for decades as a church. So how do we be in community with those who think differently, believe differently? And it's deep. It's more than just thinking and believing. These are topics that some of us hang our faith on. How do we be in community? These are questions that are haunting my dreams right now. My heart is torn for the church that I love, the church I've taken vows with to serve and minister to all of you through. Sometimes it's over which side of the bread you butter, but sometimes it's over more. But when we find common ground, when we seek out harmony, we stand together. It is possible to disagree productively. Despite what we see in our media coverage, despite in our families and our beloved church, it is possible to disagree productively and respectfully. The power of our words is palpable, and we have the entire Bible to remind us of how important our words and our actions are to our faith and our relationships with others. We need to find common ground, no matter how narrow it is. Our shared reality is a solid ground to build on. It gives us a place to talk about the difficult things. It's hard work. It's not going to be easy. It takes both sides, people willing to speak, to stand up, and people willing to listen. This Butter Battle book was published in 1984 in a time of strong fear and polarization in the world. I did not know this until after I read it and chose it for my sermon, but it was given the title Most Controversial Book by Dr. Seuss because of its strong hints toward the arms race, the mutually assured self-destruction of the world. Seuss was accused of oversimplifying the arms race. He was accused of scaring innocent children with a subject matter that did not need to be introduced to them yet, and frustrating children with an open, unresolved ending. But in spite of the feedback and in spite of the warnings, this book made the juvenile bestseller list in the New York Times and has been praised by many groups. Maybe facing dilemmas that we disagree with is not so bad. In fact, maybe we should ask our kids about these things a lot more often. Maybe they can teach us something when we talk to them about difficult situations. Much like our modern animated films like the Pixar movies and others, the story is just as much for the parents attending the movie or reading the bedtime story as it is for children. So what do you think the children of the mid-'80s thought of this book? A lot of them wrote to Dr. Seuss to give them their ending for that blank page. And their average response was, well, they talked about it. I don't know why they wouldn't talk about it. They talked about it. They both like bread and butter. A few days ago, I shared a quote from Shane Claiborne, one of my favorite modern theologians, on my Facebook page. And it stated, if we lose a generation of young people in the church, it won't be because we didn't entertain them. It will be because we didn't dare them to do something meaningful with the gospel in our world. Now, I shared this because I'm passionate about that topic. I'm passionate about the kind of church that we are leaving for our kids. But to my surprise, over the next day or so, I had friends from the deepest corners of the political left to the deepest crevices of the political right on my Facebook page like and share this quote. Unknowingly, I found common ground with literal political enemies. We found a topic and a mission that we can all agree on. Maybe not how to get there, but we found something we could agree on. We need a meaningful church to offer to our youth. We need a meaningful church for our youth to continue. It is possible. Özlem Sara Çekiç was born in Turkey, and she was the first female member of Danish parliament with a Muslim immigrant background. She has a lot going on with her identity. She served from 2007 to 2011, and as you can imagine, her identity bothered many, many people. She began receiving hate mail, mainly focusing on her Muslim faith and her immigrant background, not her platform, not anything about her job, her faith and her identity. At first, she was just deleting them. She said, I have nothing in common with these people. And the more she became involved and the more work she did on the parliament, the more hate mail she received. And someone half-jokingly told her to keep it just in case something happened. So she did, and it kept coming, and one day she had had enough. She pulled up the hate mail and contacted the one person who had sent her the most. She called him, and she invited him to coffee. She even went a step further. She asked if she could come to his house and have coffee with his family. He agreed, surprisingly. When she arrived at his home, He reached out and shook her hand, and she was disappointed he didn't look like she assumed he did. And after some small talk, some awkward discussion, they found their first thing in common. They both have road rage. She realized she liked the man. And at the same time, she did not like having so much in common with him. She realized all of the judgments that she had for him as well. She continues to practice this when she can. And doing this doesn't excuse that harmful behavior, but it has helped her humanize people. It's helped her not internalize this hate mail. The scripture I chose this morning is a long one. It's in your bulletin, but it's a powerful story of speaking and listening. We see Jesus time and time again have meaningful conversation with people, back and forth. The Samaritan woman in our story is a political and religious outsider in Jesus' time. And she is at the well at high noon, the hottest point of the day. And Jesus comes up to her and asks for water. Now she either is avoiding the other women, or she's been kicked out of the group because you don't go at high noon, it's too hot. So she's on her own. She is an outsider. And as Jesus converses with her and talks to her about water and life, and we learn of this woman's life, we hear of her pain and her abuse throughout her life. Jewish men were not to speak to women. She was unaccompanied, and they definitely did not speak to Samaritans, let alone Samaritan women. And Jesus knew this, and the woman knew this, and yet they speak for quite a while. She recognizes the social barriers that Jesus is crossing, and she tells him to. And they have a discussion, and they are both engaged. And Jesus learns something, and the woman learns something. And then the disciples come up, and they learn something. And the woman leaves, and she tells people about her experience. She becomes an apostle and tells her friends that she met the man they've been speaking about. This story can teach us what can happen when we engage in conversations about the things that mean most to us. When we don't avoid them, we talk about them. It takes both sides. One side to speak respectfully, the other side to listen respectfully, and for both sides to leave the ego at the door, leave the bandwagon at the door, and come open to a change of heart. Open to being wrong, open to be learning something. Fred Rogers, who is known as Mr. Rogers, from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. That was a show that I enjoyed very much growing up, learned a lot. He testified in front of the U.S. Senate in May of 1969 to hopefully save public television funding. With the Vietnam War raging, there were rumors of budget cuts all over, and so Fred Rogers was asked to come down and testify in front of the Subcommittee on Communications. Fred Rogers told of his dreams of what public television could do for our country's children, our future. And he spoke for 6 minutes, shorter than most sermons. He patiently made the case of why good quality children's broadcasting is needed, even while it costs us. Does anyone remember the outcome of that testimony and that bill? The chair of the subcommittee, Senator Pastore, engages with Fred Rogers on the record. They have a conversation, and they converse back and forth. That does not happen very often. And at the end, Senator Pastore said that he had goosebumps. He had been listening to testimonies for 2 days, and he had goosebumps. And PBS, Public Broadcasting Service, was given a budget of $20 million. In 6 minutes, Fred Rogers ensured $20 million for me, for the future of our country. Was this possible without Senator Pastore being willing to listen and be moved after 2 days of listening to testimony? It never would have been possible. Sometimes we are the speaker, sharing our truth in a helpful way. Other times we are the listener, open to be moved. I think we get to finish this butter battle story, that blank page. We get to choose how we deal with conflict, how we see different thought, inclusive thought. When we hold weapons that can destroy, and I mean our words as well, we are given the story to finish. We finish this story in our own lives, in our own responses and conflicts as adults. Like I said, and like the kids said, there is an obvious common ground in our little conflict. They both like bread and butter. But possibly the most important piece to remember and moved me was that the grandson is watching this whole thing. He is observing how these adults are treating one another. He is the one panicked when he sees them, and he asks, oh my, what will happen? Will you drop it first, or will he? And the adults say, we will see, we will see. So what shall we do, adults? What shall we do?